to make the Q&As a little bit more interesting, so there's only one Mario mask. So I think I'm gonna give it to, I took it because I was just there. I'm gonna give it to whoever asks like the best question on the entire day. So yeah, if you want this mask, please ask questions.
Do we start right away, or do we give people a little time?
Hmm?
Do you want to start right away?
You have 2 minutes. You want to get some comfortable, there's some water. We have Althea, Scott, Meg, Mykola. Mykola? What do you say? Yeah, Scott. We're missing Meg. We're missing Meg.
Is there phones on?
Phone's on mute. I think. Should probably double check that. Sometimes I sit on it and it unmutes itself.
But dial yourself.
Oh, I'm getting a call. Let's see. What time is counting down? Are we supposed to? Is someone going to tell us when to start talking? Should we take a vote? Is it time to start?
Here we go. Yeah, I would first start.
Start?
No, I don't.
Let's be unanimous.
Veto rights.
Okay, I think we'll get started. Can you hear me? Say, put up your hand when I'm at the ideal volume level. Okay, here? Is that good? Okay. Hello, welcome. Thanks for coming to the Shielding Summit and for being in our shielded pool. I hope you had fun with the IBC transport across the pool. So I'm joined here with 5 guests. Maybe each of you could introduce yourself and tell me your favorite conspiracy theory.
We're really starting off on that. Okay. I'm Scott, co-founder of Gitcoin and now GP at Public Works, which is a open source ecosystem fund mainly focused on things like privacy preserving technologies. My favorite conspiracy theory is, I think that maybe the most relevant one, right, is that there's a decent chance that Bitcoin was actually a CIA plot originally, right? I think there's probably some people that like have some suspicion about this in the room.
I think it's plausible.
It's plausible. We don't know where it is now. Who can say? But we should take it seriously. We should let's
Too serious.
let's look for the truth, guys. And that's all I got on that.
I like it.
Truth is out there. I'm Althea. I work with the privacy and scaling team at Ethereum Foundation. We work on a bunch of applied cryptography stuff, ZK and FHE and MPC and all the acronyms. And I really didn't want to open on this question because I couldn't think of a good conspiracy theory. Although I don't know if this counts as a conspiracy, but it's a favorite theory of mine, the Mandela effect, where like there are lots of different examples of this, the spelling of the Bernstein Bears, or like roughly half of people in this room will think that Nelson Mandela died in prison, and the other half will be very certain that he did not. And the theory goes that both things did happen, but the universe just sort of split, and some of us got stuck in the wrong one. And we're remembering the past that we were supposed to have. I don't know if it counts as a conspiracy because it's not like something that someone
No, it counts.
planned,
Absolutely.
but I really like it as a theory.
Yeah, I mean, conspiracy theory or just some sort of something close to theory.
Just like some crazy shit that might be happening. Yeah, there's mine.
I don't know what's happening here.
You're obviously unprepared.
I'm Mykola, we're privacy now, we advocate for privacy. We're doing many things, but I would go for one theory that is kind of like half true, and then you would think about. So I spent 15 years in surveillance capitalism, working in advertising agencies, trying to surveil people, to sell them things they don't need, or to rewire their thinking process, or use their biases, cognitive, to again sell the things they don't need a second time. And then in one of the movies of Adam Curtis, documentary filmmaker, he is pointing out that in the trajectory of evolution of PR plus pharma plus psychology, how we approach psychology, that's the way of controlling people. The sort of famous example is Valium. Hey, women, you have abuser at home. Take Valium, everything will be all right. Your place is in the kitchen. Those type of things that are sort of are still popular today. So when we are solving political problems with one pill or one therapist or within hyper individual approach, and I think there's a lot of conspiracy thinking you can point out that direction, and that's the sort of what's missing from these discussions as well, how we navigate emotions, how we navigate the stress, and who is producing stress, and why, I don't know, why Gare du Nord, the North train station in Brussels, impact so big shock on some white people who are coming to Brussels. Thanks.
The most important part of that, which is really interesting, is that Edward Bernays was, I think, Freud's uncle, who was responsible in this. Adam Curtis, Hypernormalization is the documentary. Really good.
Century of the Self.
But he's apparently the person responsible for this, like, consumerist, in this theory, this consumerist sort of like direction, and like largely psyoped like the last 100 years, which is big if true.
And in I think Machine of Loving Grace, there's this connection with computation and how we try to compute human behavior. That's another super cool one of conspiracy theories. Please.
Okay, cool. I'm Lasha. I'm working on a protocol called Rarimo, an overall public good we're building. It's kind of packaged under the tool, Freedom tool. There is a zero-knowledge, passport-based anonymous voting app currently used by Russian opposition to challenge the regime, and now branched out to an Iranian movement as well with prominent names. And it just like branches out, and there are like more groups and countries willing to try it out. But yeah, that's something you're gonna see, and we're gonna see, I guess, growing.
Pretty exciting product market fit.
My favorite conspiracy theory, it's hard, but
Is there a number?
the one I remember was like, there was this story about Tupac. You remember that he would like come back in like 17 years after his death, because that's what Machiavelli did, and there was like this date that everybody was waiting for him to like drop another single, but unfortunately it didn't happen.
It left us hanging. I like it.
Hi, I'm Meg. I'm the GM of Labs at Gitcoin. We are focused on funding what matters, which includes helping people fund public goods, fund privacy, and fund things in private ways. And we've recently introduced Macy as a funding mechanism. Thanks. But most importantly, my favorite conspiracy theory. This is obviously like a very entry-level one, but my mom recently had someone like come out on a new contract for the house who was a flat earther, and she had never heard of flat earth theory before, and so spent about an hour just being like, but you really think the earth is flat? Like, what happens if people, like, wouldn't we hear about people falling off and like trying to challenge this flat earth theory guy? At the end of the hour, she called me up and was like, did you know some people think the earth is flat? And like, he's making some really good points. So So anyway, my mom might be a flat earther now. But in conclusion, thanks for having us. I can't wait to dig in more into conspiracy theories and privacy.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I'm Gavin from Knowable, proud Namada core team, and I guess co-organizer. I brought there's a little builder's table down that I want to plug. You can they're magnetic tiles and you can build stuff out of them and they're fun. Yeah, so let's get started. Oh, my favorite conspiracy theory. I was a person who thought that, I don't know if it's my favorite, but I'll just expose myself here. I was a person who thought that maybe that 9/11 was an inside job because jet fuel doesn't melt steel girders. But I've since realized that how could you need so many people involved to be able to keep that contained that it's just.
Okay, I will help you here. A friend of mine in Florida, a certain summer spent in the flying school. There were Jews learning how to fly and control basically an airplane. And two of those Jews hit 9/11 in 1 month. And he was going with them in a bar. One was longer, shorter. They were talking about things. They were discussing some politics. And yeah, these things happen.
So it was like them, like they did it.
Please don't tell my mom.
Yeah, and he also said that he was. It was interesting. They would only focus on kind of just lift off and not landing.
Oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. Oh.
What is happening now?
Yeah, here, let me help. Let's get started. Oh, I'm on the wrong thing. I just have this, so I don't forget what I want to talk about. We have an hour, so if you're wondering why we're just kind of just going wherever we want to go, we'll do some of that. Yeah, so maybe just to set the stage, set the scene, what's available for funding? Does anyone want to, what do we have? What's on the menu for how public goods get funded? Anyone want to take that? Scott wants to take it. You should take it.
I feel like Meg is probably a good person to start this.
Yeah, I can talk about that. Are we talking about what kinds of things?
Yeah, what are the options? Where does funding come from?
Oh.
And yeah, and what do we like? And maybe a little bit about what we like about that, and maybe what we don't like so much, what the trade-offs are of some of the different options.
I feel like there's three big categories of funding out there. So the first one, which is probably not a favorite in this room, is traditional investments in VCs. And we see some things getting funded there that are privacy focused when they have wide business applicability or clear ROI, obviously, for the VCs. But there are some awesome examples of things VCs have funded, like Aztec Network, which is a privacy focused L2, and I think they're here today somewhere. The second category is grants. And so that's obviously our bread and butter at Gitcoin. And organizations like Aztec or ZK Sync or other privacy-focused infrastructure projects funding people who want to build privacy use cases using their tooling. And that's something that we're seeing growing a lot and is really exciting. And the third one is probably like crowdfunding or like seed-style investments. And again, a lot of things getting funded through that. So I think it really depends too on the type of thing that you're building, as well as your ambitions for the project.
I think maybe all I would add is like I think there's an interesting like yeah, definitely tension between like things that are investable or like even like retroactively fundable and things that we can fund up front through like initial grants. And I think that like what's really interesting is not just like I guess like maybe the way I'm thinking about this is like you've got these categories which we're outlining, but you've also got like when is this funded or like in what way is it funded? Is it funded monetarily? Is it funded via like kind of like sweat equity, people like doing the work? Is it funded via people participating in things like ceremonies? But then the thing I was going to mention is like, is it funded retroactively or proactively? And I think we also need sort of a combination of both. And I think that like Namada is a really interesting example here actually because you have things that are like Namada that have been supported in a sense by Anoma, which is venture funded, but Namada itself is not venture funded. So there's an interesting kind of like, I think, interplay between these different types of projects.
Yeah, I agree.
And their funding.
Yeah, I agree. So, like, what about, did we talk about, like, you know, like inflationary funding? Did anyone, I don't know if I missed that. Like, you know, you can, if we can control, like, you know, how tokens are issued, we could use issuance to, you know, fund things. Any thoughts about that?
I think it kind of...
No, I will just comment here. I've seen so many teams destroyed by tokens because instead of building things, they're over-focused on, let's say, supplying a different game that is based on a fear, instead of just saying, okay, we will create a separate company who will take care of whatever trading side of the token, and then we will focus on helping people to build stuff on our protocols. And usually, mentally, it's really hard to separate those two things. While people keep saying, yeah, tokens are cool and we will help you and stuff like that. But mentally, there's a big issue there.
I feel like it's a similar trap or like a more chaotic version of the trap that you can fall into with like VC or traditional funding where there's pressure to like return value that can like overwhelm the desire to build whatever it is you set out to build or sort of like build things in the right way rather than trying to like turn a profit or like return value quickly to someone who's not really there for the thing but is like there for the return, whether it's like, you know, 50,000 edgelords or like 7 VCs. I feel like the pressure is fairly similar, and yeah, it can kind of lead you down the same somewhat dangerous path.
Actually, I've seen recently, it's spawned from the Gitcoin team. I forgot the guys who are doing the grants mechanism, Thrive protocol and stuff, and I've seen how they are reporting, and basically it's just traditional enterprise report. Like, here's the funding, here's the amount of projects, the amount of participants, but no one discusses value for the ecosystem, apart from X projects, 200% better than expected results, blah, blah, blah. But the value for decentralization, the value for the culture is kind of missing from these cool mechanisms of how to automate a sort of impact of the public goods in that sense. And it's also kind of a big challenge on like how to address the sort of end goal. Is it end goal just to do these metrics, make it a CRM, and basically just be in the same loop of technocracy, or we can do something for the culture as well in that sense?
Yeah, it seems to me that like it's hard to evaluate impact. It's hard to say like, I mean, you need to be able to measure, are we getting more of what we want? And in order to be able to say like, what do we want to provision? how do we want to incentivize it or reward it? But I guess first we kind of have to know what it is that we want more of. And so does anybody, like, any thoughts about how to, oh, actually, I saw you lifting your mic. Do you want to talk about it?
I totally want to talk about impact. Yeah, I think that this really comes from the like the grant program manager or whoever's doing the funding, in order to make sure that they're funding the right things and they've got that like cultural alignment with the program that they're talking about. The impetus is really on them to define the impact that they're looking to see. And the wonderful thing about grants programs, like not to shade VC funding, but like VC funding has only ever one goal, which is to return a positive ROI on their investment. And with grants programs, you could have tracks that are focused on more user onboarding and using privacy tools, perhaps specifically to onboard more users and set up a really clear impact tracking around that, versus things that are aimed at improving or increasing like transactions or gas fees or those kinds of traditional metrics as well.
I feel like there's an interesting problem too, though, in privacy, particularly, which this is we were chatting about this downstairs a little bit, right? With trying to like measure impact or measure like whatever metrics. If you are doing this correctly, it should be very difficult to get information about the ways that people are using the things that you're building. Or at least it should be voluntary for people to provide that, or you shouldn't just be able to kind of reach in and find out what everybody's doing. That's the whole point. And so this is something that like the design lead at the PSE team has like also like done a lot of like thinking and some speaking about the like the need to use not just quantitative but like qualitative information, and to be open to like different ways of finding out than just like turning on Google Analytics or and to like accept some like decrease in certainty.
Because it
in
can be
exchange
gamed.
for,
As soon as it's certain, it can be gamed.
right, and it can be gamed like both by users and by people who are just playing the metrics game. They're just like delivering their OKRs and their KPIs, and they are not actually accomplishing anything meaningful. If you try to make it about metrics, you stop.
Change the game.
Yeah, you stop building toward an actual goal, and you start building like for metrics. So. Yeah, like numbers are really nice and clean and easy to work with, but they don't actually tell us that much. And there's like so much more like richness in sort of qualitative data and things like user interviews or just listening to people talk about the things that they do versus trying to collect numbers on everything.
Yeah, like a lot of the decisions we make are made with like token voting, or at least I've seen a lot of it, and it's nice and decisive, but it isn't. But like it's one way, it's one signal, and there are many different signals and many different kinds of stakeholders. Are there any thoughts around how to surface maybe more subtle signals so that because it's human preference that we really care about, right? And those are, for the most part, qualitative, I think, subjective. And so, like, different people are compelled to share their preferences for different reasons and at different times. Are there, like, and the loudest people I find are, like, most overrepresented, or certain groups, certain stakeholder groups, like token voters, right? Are there, does anyone have any thoughts around other ways to get signal from a community? Because we need to know what we want, what we actually want, right?
So I think there's two parts to this. The first is just distinguishing between qualitative and quantitative, and I definitely agree that like we over-index on quantitative metrics. I also agree that like the Goodhart's law, sort of like chasing metrics, tends to be very dangerous. And like, I mean, you see, there's lots of perfect examples of this. I think the best book that covers this well is like Seeing Like a State, right? Like James C. Scott basically just goes into like all the ways that state funding and sort of like metrics in that context sort of are lead to like more myopic outcomes. But like the difference I think between say voting as a way to get signal and say something more qualitative is I think mostly down to like showing up and like having time in the community. And I think that's a big difference where it's harder to scale. Like, why do we vote in elections? We vote in elections because it's very easy to get like aggregate information from like 100,000 or like 1 million or hundreds of millions of people. It's very hard to just get those people in a room and like have a conversation and try and figure out what is going on and what people want to see. And also, as groups scale, you tend to have different value sets. So like one of the sort of concepts that is really popular for actually, and is sort of related to quadratic funding, like with Glenn Weil's work and Audrey Tang and the sort of Taiwanese government, they've been doing a lot of work on the concept of plural voting or plural research. And the concept there is basically, how do you find different clusters of values and then create like the shortest distance bridge, or like the best sort of bridge that gets them closest to aligning with each other on some subject. And doing that, like Polis does this, for example, but like doing that well takes a lot of time and a lot more energy, and still requires some degree of like, I don't think it's purely like there's, you know, a clear boundary between qualitative and quantitative. There's always sort of something in between. But it's very difficult to get both of these sort of signals into the right spot. So I guess I think just showing up to the community is like an important thing that we underestimate. I think metrics we probably overestimate, but I don't have an actual good solution for truly figuring out like what we should be funding. And sometimes you just know, I mean, Optimism obviously has done a good job with like thinking about it after the fact, retroactive funding, because people seem to intuitively know what they've been up to, you know, in the last year that's been meaningful to them. And I think that can be useful as a way to sort of at least give some additional signal, whether that's through voting or quantitative, or whether that's just through community discussion.
Just a quick localized example. Recently, we were approached in Prague by a Chinese fund who said, we want to invest in public good. It's a philanthropy, it's not an investment. But we want to help Chinese builders contribute to privacy. And then we were like thinking, okay, we need to localize materials. They don't exist in Chinese language. Where we would find those people who would support the program, what kind of program it should look like. We were thinking about accelerator type of like a short term. And then it's kind of the same avenue that I told you last year about exploring local use cases around the world for privacy. And there are many actors who want to support that stuff. It's just that we need to build the foundation layer, like Privacy 101 localized, then some sort of matchmaking between the, I don't know, Latin American developers or researchers with some sort of opportunities here in Europe, or some researcher, PSC has many of them in, I don't know, Taiwan or the Asia Pacific. And then they will bring sort of local use cases, local perspective, and maybe through some smallish experimentations, we would see sort of the next step within the funding for privacy, because maybe some stories or projects would come from China, where we wouldn't expect them. Post-COVID China, hyper-surveilled, or stuff like that, because there are many talented researchers, builders, and why not?
It all depends like on the product side, right? But if we consider like the privacy tech, especially from a technology perspective as a public good or whatever has been done currently in the space, I think that overall, how can you get funding, whether it's like through the voting and the community to VC, it looks, for me, it's more like a maze that you have to navigate. So very early on, the good part about the blockchains and this kind of like token world is that a product, the public good, whether in privacy, can start off as a kind of a feature. So there are like many other projects, the bigger organizations or like the research is done, and something that could start as a little feature overall can grow into a bigger narrative and reach the kind of final level of like VC funding or like commercialization. I don't believe that like public goods, especially technical in privacy, exist as separately than the rest of the world. So it won't be like an island that it will be either absorbed or it will grow into a completely new bigger narrative. Well, you're gonna have some kind of like rails from a commercialization perspective. There's like, how do I see myself, right? So it's very easy to get into the collaboration with the larger blockchain teams and raise initially for proof of concept and start off as a kind of a feature, then look into the community building as a parallel and receive an early support in terms of like grants or supporters or like the using the this voting mechanism, and then try to understand if there is the another side of the coin, which is like the commercial aspect. So is that a point where a technology could be absorbed by a bigger industry use? That could be the transactional one, or that could be completely like out of nowhere. Or even within the kind of real world, there are the bigger narratives that are non-commercial, but they solve the problems of everyday life. So you can take this tag of privacy with the narratives, with the larger funds, like, I don't know, fund it as a kind of anti-corruption measure, or I kind of like bringing transparency or democracy. And this mechanism of funding does exist on a larger level. It's always been kind of like open in terms of to be merged, but somehow I do see this kind of isolated now approach that we're creating this public good as if there is no public good outside of the Web3 or the blockchain world, and that's not correct. Actually, like us now even talking with like the human rights foundations and those type of organizations, you have no idea how much of an interest there is. And you can just remove all these words that sometimes bring confusion with the blockchain and zero knowledge proofs, and just like explain on like a simplified fingers. But the overall, if narratives align, I think like this maze could be navigated, whether to a commercial funding, to a more like this kind of common good, and even the international funds who are willing to use it. Because at the end of the day, for me, like privacy is a good thing, right? So
everyone needs it, right? I mean, there might be like grassroots organizations using Signal, and there may be also like three-letter agency people using Signal, and there reportedly three-letter agencies are a big part of indirectly or directly funding Signal. So like, it's like maybe quite a broad space for some amount of alignment and interests enough that that you can that these public goods like a road, many people use it. It's not like you're not just saying like I need a road, so we'll fund it. Like the reason it's a public good is because it has broad use, right? And it says, public goods can be used as infrastructure to create things that are profitable, I think, as well.
Yes, and lastly, like a perfect scenario for me, I'm going myself through this path, so I'm here more to learn and like get the answers, but like
same
perfect scenario for me would be if the privacy tech on its own finds this kind of two sides of the coin where it could be commercialized, and it's very tricky to move it on a protocol level to like dilute with tokens and have to navigate all that mass. But if those two phases exist where you can commercialize, build out the ecosystem that is more like transactional, but in parallel support the public good completely like without any commercial interest in the same protocol or same ecosystem, that's a perfect outcome for me. But hope we all have a chance to get there.
Okay, there's a cultural war that people are not talking much, that in privacy, there's a lot of movement against capitalism embedded, and we see it's like hyper-capitalism. So generally speaking, whenever you fundraise from VC or some sort of that type of money, you will be attacked by sort of privacy maxis. For a good reason, in a way that if they're politically aware people, they want to defend their own version of the decentralization, that's the thing. On another hand, there are many activists who fundraise from VCs, they're using their money, maybe they are well aligned with those VCs. I met on a normal event in Berlin a VC who also backed Aztec, and he said that once they invested in Anon team. I was like, what? How? It's a matter of persuasion. So people would really kind of like bring something so interesting that they didn't need to dox themselves in that way. And that those VCs were kind of a bit crazy or brave, whatever they moved that way. And I think we need to challenge this kind of like coercion between those two fields of hyper like privacy maxis and sort of like how we not just scale, but how, for example, we fund research, because many even privacy projects, they went through ICOs, like from Status to Secret and others, and those funds help to back the research initial from POC trying to make money on something. They were early movers, so they show example. They've maybe even supported some conferences and stuff like that. And this is super helpful because maybe it's not about just making money, but making the right tech or innovation flourishing that the next generation of builders would use for better.
I think the TLDR here is that basically we're talking about a lot of things. We're talking about like metrics. We're talking about like different funding sources. We're talking about different sort of like structures. All of that is basically down to like balance, right? We're just saying these things, and I let me know if this kind of is a good. I'm just trying to like capture all the different pieces that we sort of went through. But like to me, it just seems like there's a much more complex system that we're all like basically interoperating with that we need to like understand and basically navigate. Whether that's like different types of funding, proactive, retroactive, whether that's like using quantitative, qualitative metrics, or whether that's using venture or like traditional grants funding. And like, I think it's much more nuanced in the context of like how we bridge those together, which is good, because that's kind of how like, you know, the rest of the economy, to your point about like non-blockchain things works, right? Markets, states, and commons, which have this problem of erosion, right? But, you know, are still present, are sort of like interoperating together.
Coordinating the alignment, you know, instead of with tribalism or like ideology, it's too easy to, you know, see differences and lean into fights, but you know, I don't think things grow well in like fighting scenarios. So, you know, even privacy itself, you know, it's like, you know, free, like you know, it's like pushing back against being observed, but you know, I'm curious to know what might grow out of these conditions, like being able to protect your information and reveal selectively, you know, I think selling privacy is kind of maybe a lost cause or just not sexy at all, but like I think there are some pretty sexy things we can build only by being able to control the flow of information. It's kind of a little off topic for the. Oh yeah, it's on topic. Building.
I think I broke my microphone.
You're good to share.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I fidgeted something and I don't know what happened. Sorry.
Silenced.
I don't think that that's off topic at all if we're talking about building privacy as a public good.
Yeah, I just saw the bill.
Yeah, I just saw the title of the panel I've been doing for the last half hour.
I just revealed myself.
But Scott just mentioned commons, and I think that like privacy and like anonymity sets and sort of that like the space of darkness is a commons of sorts. Like and this is something that I started thinking about like when I moved into a city. I started to think of darkness as a commons that is regularly destroyed, like in service to safety or, you know, illumination, whatever. You got your street lights, everybody has their porch lights on, have to see into every dark corner, and there's
Floodlights
like,
in parking lots.
right, everything is flooded with light, and there is like a practical reason for that, like practical value in that, but like at the cost of like you don't see the stars, like you lose something also. And I feel like this is just an extended metaphor for kind of like privacy as a concept, as that space like from which to reveal yourself, like into which you can retreat to just like be a person. Like that in itself, I think, is a public good that has to be supported in a way that's like different from any specific application, any specific use case, but just like the existence of privacy as a default kind of needs its own support system and like its own development.
I think to your point too, the idea that like privacy requires a totally different system in so many aspects of our lives and how we work is so underrated. Like the extent to which we need to build net new things and systems. I come into crypto from a background in advertising tech too, which talk about a like low privacy system. And when I made the switch, I was like, oh my God, like how do people even do advertising and marketing here? Like without someone's email address and dropping cookies on them and extracting all of this like private and like really like data in a really kind of violating way. We're kind of starting from scratch from a user acquisition and marketing angle. And I think that the way the space is tackling it with things like airdrops and partnerships and really kind of like valuing users' time and energy is much more generative than the systems that we've built in the past.
Yeah, I like the idea of attraction. You know, you like there are all these things that we do in our day-to-day lives, you know, that are just kind of implicit and they're just so intertwined and obvious that we don't really talk about them, and so it's hard to articulate it. But like, you know, flirting is, you know, you need to be able to hold back some information to be able to do that, and selectively share things, surprise parties, you know, gifts. Playing like a game of poker, you know, all kinds of, there's just so many things, but we just don't talk about it, we just kind of know already. But, you know, when we're trying to have things like that translate into code, code's explicit. So it doesn't translate well, and it's so subjective too. Like, what is it that I want to reveal versus somebody else? When I talk about privacy, does it mean the same thing to me as it means to you? It's kind of hard, but I think it can really show itself if we're able to like attract people and into wanting to reveal themselves, if you're coming from an advertising point of view, rather than just dragnet surveilling, you know?
I mean, they're all extremes, right? Within the private space as well. But for me, it's very simple. So it's not like we're reinventing any kind of new approach. I always give this example that like, what we want to have, me personally want to have in a digital privacy is the same experience as if I stand now, go out in a shop, like walk around, decide what I want to buy, go at the counter, engage in the conversation, ask a question if I want to, leave a cash, and leave. What is not normal in this experience? We experience on a daily basis, right? So the difference between the digital and the physical that I explained is that like no one has an information what my name is. They don't need to. No one knows what I bought yesterday. They don't have to. And no one knows like if I want to engage in a conversation. No one can make me engage in a conversation. And when I leave and nobody's like shoveling me with flyers what to buy next or whatever. So this is the digital world we have and the physical. And we just try to replicate the same experience of a physical interactions in a digital realm. So it's very simple, very
intuitive.
Natural. Yeah. And no like rewiring of our activities are needed, in my opinion, at a simpler level.
I totally agree with you mostly. Except that I think what you just described is not privacy, it's anonymity. And like these are two things that we frequently conflate. And in doing that, like, and another sort of like conflation that I think happens a lot is like the difference between public and private places. And like in a private place, you can expect privacy. In a public place, you don't get privacy, but you can go for anonymity. It's like you can not want to be remembered, you can not want to be tracked, you can not want to be identified. I think that's all like, that's valid, and those are all things that we should also be building for. But I like one of the things that I think we sort of forget to think about is creating private spaces and like places where, like you're saying, code is explicit, and that is true, but I think like we can sort of make decisions not to make decisions sometimes about what happens in a space that we build, to like leave room for people to just do stuff that we just don't even know about. Whatever happens in there, that's your business. Like that's the kind of space that's really missing in the like digital experience for me, at least. There's nowhere that isn't owned by someone, and ultimately, like my actions, the options that are available to me, are determined by someone in every digital space that I didn't personally create, and like I want to see more of that, of like places where people's like paths have not been predetermined, and like where genuinely no one will ever know what went on in there.
Yeah, like if you own it, then you're responsible for what happens there. And so like if we had technology that meant that you don't actually even know what's happening there, then it's not your responsibility necessarily, or even if it's just not owned, or if it's collectively owned.
I want to raise one more also important issue than the privacy funding, is that in a technocratic world, sort of developers decide, and they're terrible at building products or shipping products, especially not just within the financial realm, but kind of like really talking with the people who would use the product. Go there and discuss, do so-called CASDEV, which is so integral in a traditional IT. It's not rocket science. They all do this stuff. Or if you're a startupper, for you it's okay to do pivots, but then you go and talk with people, you test products. And because sometimes developers are sort of, even when they receive grants, they sort of build these smallish things and then let it go without even properly testing. And we're in a strange, bizarre situation that people are complaining on that they still lack funding or underfunded.
I have a designer, and we will work on UX stuff.
Yeah. And then
Pointing at me.
Yeah, and then they lack this, just someone who will build a conversation with the people in need for, let's say, private whatever tool, and maybe also reframing the communication, how you pitch the privacy. One point here, like when I used to work in NIM, like many people in the community were saying, I'm too small for the big government to surveil you. And of course, not many people in Latin America cares about NSA when they need to, when they lack food to buy and stuff like that. So they need another pitch of privacy. Like in Turkey, maybe it should be the VPN and access to the media, but once in a while, not sort of like 24/7. And that's the role of a product manager, to sort of find out the audience, cluster it, and then understand the need, and then to pitch sort of product, maybe not for the privacy, but sort of for the value or that people will get through the informational flow that you were referring to.
I mean, is there a chance that like there's certain type of cultures and overall the people that don't value and will never value privacy, and it's more like a kind of our cohesion trying to solve the certain problems to that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think we're talking about, like, we kind of went a little bit backwards. We talked about, like, okay, we need to fund this privacy, but now we're talking about, like, what is the privacy we care about? And then I think you're right that, like, there's different degrees to which people even care about privacy. So I think from my perspective, like, one of the things we have to sort of identify is, like, I think a really good heuristic is what is an example of a digital space, like you were saying, that still provides some of the same affordances as like a physical space that we might be used to, because that's like a scenario that we can like easily kind of map to. And I think that that's where you have, you know, things like, you know, ephemeral chats. Like, it's, if you're just having a conversation downstairs, like, people aren't going to like record you and then like put everything out there. It's like pretty easy to just like have the conversation. And I think that like there's very few places online where that's true, whether that's, you know, directly because it's like a public forum, or whether that's because it's like monitored by, you know, some three-letter agency. And I think those are like things that we need to, not that they would necessarily like, care in most of those cases, there's just way too much information. But like the thing is, like, I think defining that piece that we care about and then figuring out which piece of funding maps to those best is really important. For Signal, they're a foundation, they're largely funded philanthropically. It's like, it's worked really well for them to do that. For something that's much more, you know, for example, like Amin is working on privacy pools. Like, that's something that like they've taken on venture funding for, that I think is much more sort of dependent on liquidity, dependent on market forces. So like, those are both privacy, one for asset sort of like transactions, one for sort of information in different contexts. But like they require, or often are, it's easier to facilitate their success through different means, through different types of funding sources. But those two are just examples of things that we care about that like we think might be useful privacy tools, but they are only sort of like small little sections of what we actually each individually might think of as privacy or care about as privacy. So it's just really important for us to like dive into that and define that.
Go on the website of WhatsApp, privacy will be on top. Go on the website of Apple, privacy will be there on top. It's just a matter of how we communicate the stuff. The WhatsApp is using sort of what crypto was using during ICO age, kind of like bank them banked, and then lots of poor people on the pictures and give us lots of crypto. And WhatsApp is doing the same. Basically, women with a kid, sort of like emotional attachment to privacy. We protect you from, and then hackers, stalkers, you name it. So it's a matter of how we kind of build emotionally appealing communication, yeah, through advertising realm, but also maybe through also public good, but just public good need to be more touchy in a normal sense, and it's okay. I mean, emotions are emotions. People are attached to them. And then over-criminalization of privacy is sort of strange, bizarre direction, because Google Docs are private if you make them private. Lots of the proprietary tech are private on the basic layer, except the subpoena from the FBI and stuff like that. But generally speaking, it's there. Like,
I mean, you need it for coordination. Like when you build a company or whatever, you're building a conspiracy. You're conspiring, you know, and you can't conspire if all your information's revealed, like, you know, by force or just by default. So like, you know, I don't know how any discerning organization would ever use blockchain infrastructure for any sort of financial rails. It seems like no matter how many level ups you get in efficiency, you're by default disclosing you know, all of your most sensitive information. We've been talking about adoption in this space for so long. It's almost here, but like what discerning organization is going to use this, you know, this technology if all of their financial information is exposed to all their competitors, to everybody, you know, all their patterns, all their relationships. And GMI.
No, 2017, everyone was laughing on IBM and Hyperledger doing private chains, and now it's reversed. Like, oh, no, let's get more private.
Yeah, well, it's funny because, yeah, there's that terminology. It was always like public versus private chains, and then that kind of fell apart, all those experiments for like private chains. But like, you know, public infrastructure with you know, protected data, right? I mean, we have servers that we protect. If it's a data-driven economy, so like if you can't protect your data, like how?
This is where I feel like I need to jump in with a plug for fun cryptography stuff. Like, to me, the public blockchain is like, that's like outside. You don't like stand in the grocery store and plan your secret company, financial whatever. Like, you do that in your office. So we have this public space, right? That's the blockchain. That's where you put things that it is useful for everyone to know about. That's where, like, you know, yeah, everyone can see everything. That's valuable sometimes, but more often that shouldn't be the case. And then we sort of, you know, we build buildings and close the doors and close the blinds and whatever. Like, we can, like, on top of that public layer, this is the whole selling point of Ethereum, right? There's a virtual machine on there. We can build stuff. We can build applications that, like,
You can build buildings with blinds.
right. Yes, and a lot of the like sort of programmable cryptography stuff has come a very long way in the last couple of years, such that we can kind of build those like more private spaces that sort of exist in the context of, like, interact with the public space, but where you can kind of like have your conspiracy, as you call it.
I don't know if the Go ahead.
Oh, I love your point too. Like you put it so much better than I would have. But like so many of us, even in this room, work at DAOs and foundations and on-chain organizations that are so committed, and it's so essential for us to work on-chain. But how do we balance these, like the need for privacy for internal ops, the things that you would do in your office versus the grocery store, while still remaining and growing on-chain?
I think architecturally we've arrived to that point. So you got off-chain but verifiable through the zero knowledge proofs and all this technology stack, and on-chain for coordination. So more or less, those that's at least like how I see those two worlds now coordinating and working together. So
I don't know if the analogy falls apart, but like our public spaces and our private buildings, we don't have well, maybe it's starting in some places, but we don't have cameras observing from all over the world at any given time, anybody as they come and go from those buildings, all the behaviors and inferences you can draw about what's going inside of those buildings based on what you can see outside of those buildings. Does the analogy, does that just fall apart at this point, or is it?
Well, I don't think it falls apart so much as starts to resemble the actual world that we live in right now. And I think that is problematic, because I think that the effect of that, of feeling and knowing that you're being watched sort of more and more often, whether it's by the CCTV or your neighbor's doorbell or your own refrigerator, that affects the ways that people behave and interact and create. I mean, if you just put a picture of an eyeball on the wall,
yeah, people behave differently.
People behave differently, and so I think that's a very important point. There are places where you know that you are not being observed. There's a level of creativity. There's a
freedom.
layer. Yeah, there's a layer of human expression that is not available except sort of in that place of darkness. Hannah Arendt has a really beautiful quote about it that I can't remember, but look it up.
Look it up.
I just think this is actually we kind of got to a core point, which is why do we, so there's the theoretical, philosophical version of why we care about privacy and why we're talking about funding it in the first place. There's also the practical, which I think comes back to the creativity. And the creativity point is I think even from and the company example is good here for this reason, even from that perspective, the reason you have it is to actually get more things done. There's actually, this is the funniest argument I can make for privacy, but there's a productivity argument for privacy, which I think more people should care about, even if they don't care about privacy from a philosophical or theoretical standpoint. They should care about it from a practical standpoint. And I think that's something that we've lost, and I think it's partly why we see discourse that has sort of declined. We see lack of creativity across different sort of domains. I think we're generally there's a feeling of stagnation. David Graeber talked about this in Utopia of Rules very famously. He was asking where's the flying cars and so forth, and he's a little bit hyperbolic about it, but it was a really good both book and then set of talks he did. And I think that there's a real conversation to be had about how we make that case and how that changes the funding landscape for privacy, and when we can frame it in those more practical terms, for a broader audience.
It makes the grounds more fertile for creativity. People feel more free to be able to kind of do bigger things and together. Maybe.
Yeah, that's where we wrote an article on cypherpunk profiles recently, because I personally thought that it's quite captured by people from the past that are stiff and cannot let it go, and train youngsters, but be kind of super humble in terms of, oh, you are beginning your journey, let's start with something smallish, instead of
figuring yourself
here's
out.
a graphene OS, yeah, let's go. And then you go Wikipedia, who is the example of cypherpunk, and there's the hyper-capitalist Horowitz, Mark Andreessen, and you're kind of oh, it's a sort of joke how we approach the legacy information. So what we found that basically we're now talking and want to help hackers, which are not hackers in a traditional sense, but more like people who want to have fun, to find out the privacy as also appealing sort of playground, but they need, let's say, a communal support. They want to understand that they can hack private tool and then go for a rave, that this community will be super helpful, I don't know, like embracing their diversity, will tell them, not patronize them on privacy, but be super helpful in terms of, oh, you don't know a thing, here a small use case of like, I don't know, collecting some sort of NFTs privately, as Sismo done like for several years ago. And they were quite well with that because it was like low-hanging fruit. And I think that sort of fragmenting the journey of the builder through privacy from a smallish like entry point of someone who was collecting meme coins. I know those people. Designer who is doing our merch, he's like a champion of meme coins, but at the same time, he deeply cares about privacy. So sometimes those unexpected profiles could really stand out instead of just focusing on like, it's only, I don't know, like dark fi people or only some sort of hyper hackers who could crack a phone device, PlayStation, whatever.
I think that's like such an important point that there's not like, and like the number of times that I've heard nobody cares about privacy, please stop saying that. It's not true. Everyone cares
Absolutely
about privacy.
not true.
What's true is that like privacy means something different to everyone. Like if what we mean by privacy is the ability to reveal what you want to who you want in the contexts that you want, that means something different to everyone, and it means something different to like the dark fi hacker than it does to the like person who wants to have a business meeting that everyone can't listen in on, than it does to like somebody who wants to like watch porn without their parents knowing. Like these are all different motives, all different versions of privacy, but like the fact that everyone sort of wants to draw the boundaries in different places doesn't mean that they don't need the ability to do that. And like I wonder if part of why we have such a hard time selling this is that it like the value proposition is different to every person.
It's so unique.
It's unique to every person that you talk to about it. Like what they want privacy for is different. And even depending on the context that they're in, if they're sort of thinking personally or professionally or like socially or about their relationships with their family, or like, I really hate when I go to the coffee shop and they remember that I've been there before. I hate being irregular. Like, what people want privacy for changes all of the time. There's no like one thing that it's going to mean to everyone.
I think special relationships are defined by those boundaries. So that might be one thing that we kind of have in common. That you know, there are things that I will say to my partner that I would not say if she was on this stage. There are things I would say in the privacy of our home that I would share about myself or my preferences that I would absolutely not say here. And that's a big part of what defines that special relationship is what you choose to reveal or not.
And that isn't like secrecy either. Like I would also not speak this way to my parents at Thanksgiving. That would be weird. This is just like being able to like define your relationship to your context and the other people in it.
Yeah, and who's in that, right? And so like if you've got marketers who are like eavesdropping on all the things that you care about most, right? It's it changes things, and also changes us as a society, because now my behaviors are being analyzed and I'm being set up on it, like without even knowing it. Once my patterns are known.
Yeah, and we're so reliant on this infrastructure that has been built like with the sort of surveillance capital like motive to coordinate in all of these different ways, and like to have social media or email or collaborate on documents or whatever it is. And so this to me is like the really powerful like general value proposition for the combination of blockchains and like privacy in like these sort of like public-private like interfaces, that you can have the coordination that comes from having a global, visible to everyone on Earth, sort of reliable public ledger, but while also sort of maintaining your like your privacy, which is ultimately just actually your like humanity and your agency, without having to give up the ability to coordinate with whoever, wherever. That's like so magical.
Absolutely. This is a great point, like great way to, I think, end. But are we totally tapped for time? Do we want to take anything from the audience? Or are we? Yeah, there's no pressure. If you want to move on, we can move on. Because that's like such a good, yeah, just drop the mic. Does anyone, we've been doing all the chatting. Does anyone have any like burning kind of ideas that they want to share, or like questions, or? Do you want to hear?
Thank you. I'm from Kori. We're building a privacy-centric Ethereum layer 2. First of all, thank you for what you're doing. In terms of funding, we're deploying a big fund to fund privacy on Ethereum through Gitcoin as well. My question is as follows. There is so much information already on public blockchains, which is immutable. And there's very little doubt that it will be traceable in the future. It will just be possible, I don't know, maybe 10 years to just backtrace everything that has already happened. What are your thoughts about this? And is there anything that we can do with the mess we left already?
That's not great. And
oh,
no.
And Earth is flat.
Cannot do anything. I mean, we can't really do a lot about that, right? I mean, you're to your point, like it is there. I think all we can do is sort of like think about that and sort of factor what we're doing now into the future. And I think that's probably for the best because, I mean, we sort of touched on this here. I'm sure other people have talked about it too. Like, there's not that much adoption yet. We're not that far along. We probably should be a little bit further than we are after 10 years in terms of adoption. But that also means that we have time to sort of fix some of these challenges and address them. So I think, yeah, what you're doing sounds awesome on that front. A huge fan of just generally trying to really just, to Althea's point, like give the option for this in contexts where it might be relevant to people, depending on their preferences, and to sort of just push that forward now. And, I will, I guess, deal with the rest of the data as that becomes relevant.
That's what CIA wanted while designing the Bitcoin, right? To live.
I'm now thinking that sort of phrase opt out can also mean opt out from that digital footprint within the on-chain footprint, and then creating alternative sort of personas. Because, for example, there's with verifiable credentials and all this ID concept, there's an interesting thing that you can create this sort of fragmented personas that are not linked within each other. For example, if I play whatever, like Diablo 4, there will be one nickname. If I do some transaction, another sort of nickname and stuff, or fractional information like I'm above 18. And that is an interesting direction that maybe thinking broadly in terms of your data footprint, what does it mean, and how you cannot link whatever you would do on chain in the future within a public good spectrum to that legacy data. And legacy data is not just important to, let's say, intelligent agencies, but to Google, to many data miners, credit brokers. Oh, like for the Ficoin states, credit scoring, they will be super happy to see all your balances, hidden balances. Wow, super cool. And I think that's an interesting cultural question. And the big question goes to ENS. That's just bad idea in general. Linking your persona to all your assets and to all your legacy, on-chain legacy. As well as either scam, or there were moments when we praised all of them.
Maybe there will be like identity mixes in the future. So you just go through and you come out as a completely new, fresh, 5 different profiles.
Hello. Okay. Hello. Yeah. I'm Izzy. I'm highly interested in data privacy and public goods, of course. And thank you for this panel. And I think privacy is a big topic that we'll probably spend like 3 days summit on. but we've actually covered like the views from the consumer, marketer, product manager. And my question is, how do regulators or regulations, how does that affect what you build or how you build or fund privacy like orgs or protocols? Like, how does that affect it?
That's a great question. Who's sweating?
Lefteris from Rotke, who's supposed to be here during ETH Berlin, he said that no, it was in Seabase, our meetup. He said, I don't know if I should build privacy because I can be pursued, but also that's a legacy of sort of German state. When you live in Germany, you have this sort of hyper control. So that's also cultural. If you move to different geography, that could be different implication. And with Tornado Cash developers, we see sort of how, or the other protocols, we can see how the, let's say, one country ability to chase you impacts the way how you approach and think about privacy. So really like territorial context matters a lot. And then within the hackathons, we've seen that many people creating a new unknown GitHub accounts to contribute to privacy hackathons, which is interesting phenomena. But then there's a sort of challenge for you as a judge. Who is this person? Is it a new project, legit? Because before you just click, oh, this guy was or person was building for years.
Reputation.
Yeah, reputation. Yeah, there's an issue with the reputation. And so many privacy builders are now kind of like on hold. That's why if you analyze the use cases within the hackathons, you would see private messaging protocols, private GitHub, so the whole open source private infrastructure that will be independent from censorship resistance. And I think that sort of a year will pass, we will have this basic infrastructure built by the community, then it will be much easier, and maybe Rarimo will integrate much more easier to kind of like contribute and also have that reputational side, because that's super important.
I just wanted to mention there's a great paper in 2015 by Philip Rogaway called The Moral Character of Cryptographic Work, and what he talks about in that paper is basically that cryptography is basically fundamentally political or regulatory because it rearranges power, right? It's like fundamentally like changing that structure. And I think in this context, you can't, you know, what's interesting is where is the jurisdiction with the least KYC? It's the United States because they have the least requirement to comply with their own regulations. They have enough power, they don't have to. If you're going and doing business with the United States, you have to comply quite heavily. But you do have to comply. And I think that like that will be a huge like challenge for a lot of people who are like more like OG cypherpunk, is that like it's very, very, I think it's a very uphill battle to try to totally win that. I think it's a question of trying to work with them. And that's what, for example, like Amin Salmani is working on, yeah, this guy. He's working on a great project which strikes this balance, perfect timing, which basically is aimed at trying to allow for things like mixers, things like hiding, like, or not hiding, that's another term that has a pejorative meaning, but like trying to basically allow for people to transact privately while still ensuring that they're complying with those regulations. And that's a really important, by basically, for example, checking against lists, managing the different sort of like KYC frameworks that groups like countries like the United States have. And I think that's just a really important thing to balance, that, you know, we kind of live in that world where power is not equally distributed, and you have to sort of address where we are in the world today rather than the theoretical world. And I think those are the types of tools that, you know, cryptography as a political tool is one way we can sort of do that. That's my sort of, just wanted to plug that, I guess, also for, you know, the audience.
Quick comment on the regulation aspect. So privacy applied, anything transactional, financial, they'll come after you. They'll try to like shut it down. They'll try to rearrange. They try to dig deep. Somehow, another very simplified space, the social identity and those things have slipped away during the internet building from the state. So there's less regulation right now. But what we see right now, that's what I'm saying. But what we see in terms of now, the straight emphasis in the name of the protection of the users, the digitalization of the identity documents, the regulation over the like sign-ins into the different services, all the certificates around the websites, that means that they're coming. And it's a tough war because it's under the protection of the users from the corporations who have taken away the space in the form of managing your identity. And I expect this to be kind of a pretty tense battle going forward.
I think we want collective responsibility. Like, if it's the locus of power that's the issue. So, you know, if you own something, then you're responsible for what happens. If you own some land and somebody, I don't know, falls in a hole, you know, it's like you should have built a fence or whatever. But like if it's like a commons space and there's no, you know, and we collectively own something, then it's much harder to you know, to make one person particularly responsible. You just have to do your job differently. Like if you're trying to enforce something, then now instead of using dragnet surveillance or whatever, you would normally, whatever, you know, would make your job a whole lot easier. Like you have to use either due process or you need to just find another way to do it, because it may be that it's more important that we have that fertile ground to be able to like create and coordinate and that sort of thing than it is to be able to kind of prevent any sort of crime or anything that any social bad, you know, that we don't want.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of what I wanted to say also, and that, like, just, no, how dare you? No, like, not legal advice. I am not a lawyer, I am not a regulator, I don't know what they all think, this is just what I think, but, like, a government can compel you to reveal whatever they want. They have all the guns, they have all the power. Like, if they sort of suspect you of something, they can investigate you. They have all of those tools. And I think there's a big difference between, like, can a government come and demand something from me? And should a government have, like, just plain text read access to everything that everyone does ever by default? I don't think that it follows that should be the case. And it's only in the last, 50 years that was even possible, and we've very quickly normalized the idea that governments should just be able to read every interaction, like...
Yeah, you need a warrant to have a phone line, but now that we don't have phone lines, sure, just, because it's digital, suddenly now you can just listen in wherever you want,
and right, they can just buy up the same data that advertisers use and kind of learn everything that they want to learn. And I don't think that there's like anywhere in the US Constitution a mandate that be the case. So
there should be a reason to be like,
right.
You should be suspected of something. You can stop my car just randomly and start searching my car. Like, no. So what are you searching my digital life for, right?
Yeah. So like, I at least think that there's a strong argument to be made for like the possibility of being compliant without being completely transparent and legible.
Exposed, because transparency has like good connotations,
right.
But exposed, I think, unnecessarily.
I don't think that those are the same thing. And now we have to leave.
And we're out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.